Hey everybody, this is Pastor Chris. I'm coming to you live from Lexington Park Baptist Church. This is PC Studios and it is May the 10th, 2023. How in the world are you doing today? I hope you're blessed and highly favored by God. Good to see you out there. I think I saw a few of you. I think I saw Sandy and Marisa, and I think I saw somebody else out there on the channel. Welcome to the program. I think Sherry's out there as well. So anyway, welcome to the program. Good to be with you. Make sure you sign in on facebook.com/Pastor Chris McCombs. I know some of you watch on Lexington Park Baptist Church and some of you watch afterwards. Thank you for coming and being discipled here, as we are always trying to be disciples that make disciples. So today we're going to continue to look at, I'm kind of doing this legacy talk this week based on a sermon that really tagged me, and I'm just kind of developing this. I'm actually modeling what I want you all to do. I know that I wish all 250 of the congregation that were here Sunday would watch this again during the week, but I know that's not realistic. But I take that sermon, I broke it down, I'm applying it to my life, and through the week I'm letting it marinate in my life. What was spoken, my notes, I'm looking at my notes, I'm sharing them with you. It's kind of, but my notes are total. My notes and what he preached, though what God's doing in my heart is different as I'm sharing it with you, and that's kind of how the Word of God should happen. It should develop in you. It should come into our lives, and then it should produce fruit. It should change our thinking. It should move us to action. It should make us think and ponder these things. And so as I started to look at the patriarch and the matriarch of our faith, which is Abraham and Sarah, you all, we know that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are the patriarchs, but the matriarch of the first one is Sarah. And we're leading into Mother's Day coming up. And I'm going to be preaching on Lois and Eunice of Timothy this Sunday, and so I've been really delving into this legacy idea. What kind of legacy of faith are we exhibiting? How are we living our lives to influence others? I hope that all of us are doing a great job of it. I don't know the women that are out there, the mothers that are out there, the daughters that are out there. How are we doing and ministering to each other to leave a legacy of faith? Fathers that might be out there are men of God. What are you doing to leave a legacy like Abraham and Sarah did? They messed up too, just like you and I did, like we do. That there wasn't the patriarch and matriarch of our faith were not perfect. Made many mistakes. We talked about that a little bit this week, but they left a legacy of faith. And so I want to encourage us that we should be striving to do the same thing. We should be striving to live a legacy of faith. So I've not read the text. I've talked about it, so I want to read it today. Hebrews 11. We are going to be starting in verse 8, and we're going to go through 13. It says, by faith, when he was called, he obeyed, and he set out for a place that he was going to receive an inheritance. He went out even though he did not know where he was going. So Abraham just went. We know if we go to Genesis, we'll see that account. By faith he stayed as a foreigner in the land of promise, the land that God promised, living in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob. There's our patriarch. There's the forefathers, right? Abraham, now Isaac and Jacob, they all went to this land that they went to, the land of inheritance, the land of promise, and they lived there. They're co-heirs of the same promise. So Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are co-heirs of the same promise. So are you. And the matriarchs are not mentioned here. They will be in a minute, but the matriarchs are there too. So women, you're not shortchanged here, okay? I want to make sure women, and I'm going to make that very clear this Sunday, women, you're not shortchanged. You're so important to the family of God and to your family and to society. So by faith they stayed there. They were co-heirs. Verse 10, for he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. I want to pause there for a minute. Verse 10 is talking about a promise. God's talking to Abraham in a tangible promise, a land. But Abraham's thinking bigger. The Hebrew writer is telling us this inheritance is not just here. Abraham knew God told him to go to a foreign land and he would leave there as a foreigner. But he knew there was a greater city that was coming. Now we know in Revelation 22, right, when we can fast forward, there's a city that's coming. There's a new Jerusalem. There is a place with streets of gold. There's a place with streams of water, and the living tree of life is there. We know this. But Abraham is looking forward to that day, for he was looking forward to a city that had foundations, whose architect and builder is God. He's not just talking, now some might say, well, he was looking to the temple in Jerusalem. Well, no, the Hebrew writer's writing after that. He's not talking about some man-made thing. He's talking something eternal. The architect is God, and it's eternal. So Abraham knew, even though he had a promise here on earth, there was a greater promise. Everyone in my audience, I want you to hear this. The promises of God on this earth are true, and they're for all of us. But there is a day that's coming. There is an eternity that waits for all of us, and that's why I'm talking today about living beyond your mortality. Living beyond your mortality. Abraham lived beyond his mortality. Now, he did that practically, but spiritually. He's in heaven. He's with the Lord. He didn't know the promise of the Lord. He did not know the Messiah. He never saw the temple built. He lived in tents, you all. But he lived in the promised land. But he knew the day was coming. He knew there was a city. He knew there was an architect. He knew there was a God that was building something so much bigger than anything he could have here on earth. He lived beyond his mortality. He knew to look beyond here and now. How are you doing with that? You know, with the song Beulah Land, do you see beyond this earth? Do you see beyond this mortal body? Do you see beyond the grave? Jesus, did he conquer the grave? He's the risen Lord. Abraham, we talk about Abraham's bosom, the place that we die that was good before Jesus, right? The paradise that existed before heaven, or however we want to say it. We may not even fully comprehend it, even though we can read the scriptures and kind of try to put it together. But this place where they went, Abraham knew there was something greater. So then we move on in verse 11. By faith, here's Sarah, here's your matriarch for you. By faith, Sarah herself, when she was unable to have children, received power to conceive an offspring, even though she was past her age, since she considered that one who had promised was faithful. Now we know she laughed. We know that Sarah didn't immediately go, I believe exactly what I'm hearing. I'm laughing at this, right? But at some point, let's not believe, she did believe in God. She did trust in him. It just was a laughable moment. Yeah, right. You know, God's going to do that. I mean, has any of us done that? Yeah, right. God's going to really do that in my life. Yeah, he could never do that. We know he can do it. We know nothing's impossible, but there's a part of us that holds back. And we say that could never happen here. I've heard it here at Lexington Park. That, you know, nothing good happens in Lexington Park. That can never happen here. You know, do you know our past? I've dealt with that for 7 years. Not as much now. That talk has kind of stopped. I mean, some people still want to move away from here, and there's all kinds of chatter like that I get from time to time. For the most part, though, people are like, God is moving here. God is doing things here. And so we need to have this belief that God is in the midst of us doing great things. Sarah knew that. There may be some doubts. There may be some times where we struggle with, why, God, did you let that happen? Or why did that happen? Or why has this happened? Or why did that person leave? Or God, why are we struggling with this or that? Or, you know, we can do that in all of life, because guess what? There's always going to be stuff going on in life that doesn't make sense. But you know what? God is still there. God is still moving. He was moving in Sarah's life right here to bring the promise, not just the promised land, but that God would be faithful. So Sarah knew the one who made the promise was faithful. It wasn't about her old age. It wasn't about Abraham. It wasn't about anything. It was about the God who made that promise, and he is faithful. Then in verse 12, therefore, from one man, in fact, from one as good as dead, came offspring as numerous as the stars of the sky, innumerable as the grains in the sand along the seashore. So listen, Abraham didn't get to see this. He was dead. He was as good as dead. He was in old age. Sarah was in old age. But Isaac came. They didn't see the stars. They didn't see the seashore. You and I are that now, though. We are the legacy of Abraham. We are the legacy of Sarah. We are through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. No, we're not Israelites. No, we're not Jewish. But we're through the Messiah. And we are circumcised by faith into the faith of God. So we have the same promise that God will bless us, and there will be huge numbers. We have the church now. That's us. We are the promise of God. Isn't that a beautiful thing? I think it is. Even though he was yet dead, even though we were dead in our trespasses, Christ brought us to life, right? It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. Scripture's filled with metaphoric talk like this type of stuff. God will fulfill his promise through us. He will save us. Anyone who calls upon his name will be saved. All who believe in Jesus become a child of God. The Holy Spirit that's in us adopts us. So we can cry out, Abba, Father, Daddy, God. Isn't that awesome? I think that's just awesome. That's our legacy. We are the family of God. We know that there's a thing that awaits us. Just like Abraham's looking forward to a city to come, we too look to a place that is yet to be. We live on earth with the promises of God, but with the promise of eternity. And then look here. All, in verse 12, or verse 13, these all died in faith. We could also, they all died in flesh. So Abraham and Sarah, they died, but they had faith. They died in their flesh, but they had faith. Their spirit went on. Although they had not received the things that were promised, but they saw them from a distance, greeted them, and confessed them that they were foreigners and temporary residents on this earth. Let's just stop and as we look at this legacy, living beyond mortality. When I grew up at Heritage Creek Baptist Church, there was Heritage Creek Baptist Church, and then there was a Christian church of Brownsboro right across the street. And together, they both of the churches looked at a cemetery. And in that cemetery, my daughter Victoria is buried. All of my father's parents, what would be my great-grandpa and grandma from his side, and my grandparents from his side, I never knew them. They're all buried there. Then you go up a little bit farther into that cemetery, and my grandma and grandpa from my mother's side, who I knew all of my life, into my adult years, the Gorbents, they're there. At another cemetery, not that one, I also knew my great-grandparents. But also in this cemetery, you can go to the other side to the parish side of my family. And buried in there is my great-grandpa Walker. Samuel's middle name's after him. And I knew great-grandpa until I think I was into, Shawnetta got to meet him. So I know Shawnetta knew him. So I think he died around when I was about 21. My great-grandpa Gorbent, same time frame. Grandma Gorbent was around at least for Macy, so she lived almost to 2000, I think was the year she died. Macy was a baby. So I knew all of them. They're buried there. They're in the cemetery. And I can go there, and there's other relatives that are a little bit more distant from me, my aunts and uncles and great aunts and uncles, all in this cemetery. There's also a lot of people that I don't know in that cemetery. A lot of people that are buried there that I don't know who they are. It's not a huge cemetery, it's big. But it's right by the church. So listen to what I'm going to tell you here. Churches used to have cemeteries. If you go find older churches that have cemeteries, I mean, I'm grateful today we don't have a cemetery, but I guarantee you build a new church. If a new church is built, they don't want a cemetery. Now, this is really important to understand and distinguish the differences, what I'm going to say here. They don't want that because one is old and it doesn't look new, and that's where dead people are. It's just not. But listen, back in that day, and it should be the same for us today, when we went to church to worship our living God, we were reminded of our mortality. You and I will die. That mortality should stir our souls to say, how will I live beyond my mortality? What legacy? I'm passionate. What will I leave behind? Will I make a difference in my church? Will I make a difference in my family? Will I make a difference in my community? Well, will it matter? Because listen, when I die, people will forget Chris McCombs. They will. I'll be in a cemetery. Bury me in a pine box. I could care less. I'm with the Lord at that moment. But what will my legacy be? I'm like one who is dead. I am waiting for the promise that is to come. I know I am just a temporary resident of this earth. And that someday I will receive the things that have been promised to me through Jesus Christ. Just like Abraham believed not just in Isaac, but something greater than Isaac. Something greater than the stars and the seashores. Yes, that's a great promise on earth, but there is even something greater when we get back there and we look at what he talked about there in what verse 10. I'm looking forward to a city that has foundations, whose architect and the builder is God. Listen, you all, this legacy thing's a big deal. How are we living our lives beyond mortality? We're going to die. How will we influence the days that we have here on this earth? And when we're gone, what will that mean to those that are left behind? Will it be a legacy of an inheritance of a piece of property or a bank account? That's not going to last. But a legacy of faith will. And that is what Abraham and Sarah gave us. It was much more than the promised land. It was much more than a tent. It was much more than any possessions or of inheritance. It's a legacy of faith. And so I want to encourage you, mothers and Mother's Day, live beyond your mortality. Influence the people around you. Be a part of something that's bigger than you. Be a part of the church. Be a part of your home. Be a part of community in a way that represents what is to come. The promises of God here and now, but the promises yet to be. That we will live beyond our mortality. We're forward thinking. We know we're foreigners, but forward thinking to what God has promised. Maybe we need to recalibrate our vision of our legacy. Maybe we need to step back and really process things differently. Maybe we need to step back and look at the stars and look at the seashore and say, I'm the promise of Abraham and Sarah. I'm the promise of what God made back then. By faith, I'm here. And by faith, I will be there too. When we see a cemetery, I want you to think of that. How am I living beyond mortality? Because someday, that will be you and me. What difference will we make? I pray you'll make a legacy difference of faith. Hey, that's all I've got for you today. I hope that motivates you. That's not supposed to, it's supposed to motivate us to really think these things out and how we live our life. Will we be godly people here on earth, living the promise God's given us here, believing like the promise that still goes before us? That's how Abraham lived. That's how Sarah lived. That's how we should live. Hey, God bless you. Have a good day. I hope to see you here tonight for Wednesday night study at 6 and dinners at 5. Anyway, have a great day. We'll see you here tomorrow. God bless.